we think that everyone at least should be capable of performing the overhead press well with good alignment, because that means that they've got various qualities that we want to see in most of the athletes and the lifters that we coach. Not only the shoulder mobility, but also the core and bracing ability, but also the motor control to be able to balance their body and their center of mass whilst the weight is traveling overhead. Yes, it's going to be good for your front delt and your tricep development, pec minor to a degree as well, but a lot of the time when we're putting this in there, we're doing it because we're trying to teach that lifter how to ground themselves into the floor, how to brace properly, and how to stabilize as that heavy load goes over their head and they have to balance with it. So there are a lot of things that are going on with the overhead press that, whilst it may not be the single optimal lift for any one specific goal, especially if that goal is perhaps hypertrophy, it brings a lot with it in terms of side effects and bonuses. That means it really should be a staple in the workouts and the programmings of most serious trainers. What we've got through these first 4 variations is a series of exercises that are going to require progressively more thoracic or shoulder mobility to achieve the end range position with good alignment. So the very first variation that we would start with would be a basic landmine press. So for those of you who don't know what a landmine is, it's basically just a pivot that you put one end of the barbell in. If you don't have a landmine, you can very simply put the end of a barbell in a corner and use that as the pivot itself. You're going to grab one end of the barbell with it either locked in the corner or in the pivot, and you're going to press up and out in front of you. And basically, because of the pivot and the weight of the bar being in front of the body, when we lock out in this position, this is as much shoulder extension as we need. We don't need to get into that true locked out position overhead. We are well short of that. So even if we have really limited shoulder range here, we can still get some form of overhead press-ish pattern here and start to ingrain that movement pattern without seeing any compensation going on. The next step then would be to go to something like a high incline dumbbell press. So when we say high incline here, we're usually talking at around 60 degrees, okay? Again, we're not going to really need that truly stacked vertical arm position because we're going to be supported back on a bench. So again, when we're in a locked out position on this incline, the arm is going to be more here. So yes, it's elevated more than where we were in the landmine press, but it's still well short of that truly locked out overhead position we would see in a military press. The other benefit that we're now going to get from this exercise is because we're using dumbbells, we're using 2 unstable objects that aren't linked together. They're not on a partially fixed path like we are with the landmine, so the stability demands of the exercise are going to go up. From there then, when the lifter can perform this well, we would look at moving to a dumbbell or barbell cervicus press. So that's basically an overhead press where you are sat down on the floor with the legs out straight in front of you. So now we are actually going to be requiring that truly locked out vertical arm position at the top of the movement. So now we need their thoracic mobility to be in a position where they can do that properly. However, this is going to be less demanding than a true military press because what we've done is shorten the lever arm and made the lift easier to stabilize. If you think about doing a standing military press, your anchor point is going to be your feet on the floor, and when you're in a locked out position, that bar is very, very far away from your anchor point, which is your feet on the floor. If we then change to a cervicus press, so we're now sat down on the floor, our hips and our glutes are now the anchor point. So now when we're locked out overhead here, we've brought that anchor point way up, much closer to that locked out barbell. So the stability demands are going to be less compared to a standing overhead press. When we go with a cervicus press, and we're sat on the floor with the legs out straight, the torso is going to be locked in a pretty much upright position. We don't have the ability to rock back and forth because we can't root into the floor and compensate for it. So what we're then teaching the lifter to do is how to press the bar overhead without being dependent on that leaning back to help even out the balance point of the lift. So then when they can hold a good barbell cervicus press in a locked out position, that's when we would finally progress then to the standing military press. If you wanted to do an intermediate here, you could potentially put a dumbbell standing overhead press here if you wanted to, but 9 times out of 10 at least, if you can perform the barbell cervicus press reasonably well, then you're probably in a position where you can jump straight to that standing military press with the barbell. So the first thing that we want to look at basically then is how we set the rib cage and the hips whilst we're performing a military press. Now in the other sections like the squat and the bench press, for example, we've already talked about rib and hip alignment quite a lot. How we set the ribs and the hips for a military press is going to be very similar to that of the squat, in that we want to be in a position where the hip is in a neutral position, so it is stacked under the rib cage and the diaphragm, so we can get a proper brace. Now, what we see in a lot of lifters is they're going to stand in the start position for their military press, and they're going to be in a ribs flared position. The first thing that this is going to do now with the ribs flared up is going to pre-stretch the abdominal wall so that we can't brace as hard here. And now that we've got this exaggerated lumbar curve in the back, now that's going to put extra pressure on here. So now when we're pressing up and we put load in this position, a lot of that extra load then is going to go straight into compressive forces on that lumbar spine and cause a lot of problem there. So the first thing that we need to master is then when we're bringing out the bar, being able to stay in that rib tucked down and stacked compressed position whilst we're in the start position, and obviously then we need to work hard to maintain it whilst we press overhead, which is why the military press again is one of the best exercises we can do for improving core stability and core strength.